Hello, welcome to this DCS P-51D tutorial. In this video, I will talk about taxi, takeoff, and landing of this aircraft. So to begin, our plane is already started up. I can actually go ahead and turn the starter cap down. And for taxi, we're going to want to make sure we pull the stick all the way back. I'll go ahead and bring up my controls indicator so you can have that available to you. So stick all the way back, and that will lock our tail wheel, enabling us to taxi around. I'll go ahead and give her some minor throttle. And to turn with our stick all the way back, we can utilize our rudders. And if it's not turning fast enough, we can give it very minor left and right brakes. And we can kind of spin the aircraft, just like that. All of your throttle and stick and rudder movements are going to be very, very minor as you get a feel for it. So I'll taxi on over, can look around, and utilize these markings on the left and right of the runway to let us know if we're going straight or not. Just give her a little bit of throttle, and then I'm gonna let her coast. If she starts to slow down, I'll add some more. If you do not have an axis for your wheel brakes and you can't ease into your brakes and you have them on buttons, just be aware you're going to have to push and hold to brake. And if you're moving too fast, you're going to want to tap your brakes to slow down, because if you actuate your brakes completely as you are coming to a stop, you'll pitch the nose forward and you'll wreck your propeller on the ground. All right, I see my turn off up there. I'm going to slow down. Going to slightly ease my brakes. Just pump them a little bit. Stick back the entire time. Give left rudder to turn. A little bit of left brake so I can turn a bit sharper. Some throttle as I go. And I'll straighten out and slowly come to a stop. Alrighty, at this point, I'm going to verify my takeoff configuration. My rudder is in the 6th position. My aileron is at about 2 or 3, just touching the 0. My elevator is touching this panel here. My flaps are all the way up and 1 down. At this point, we can talk about some of our gauges. Here, we have our speed in miles per hour. Here's our altitude, our slip gauge, our rate of climb or descent, artificial horizon, manifold pressure, which relates to our throttle, RPM, which relates to our propeller RPM, and throttle. And then down here is a very important gauge, and this is our temperature of our plane. When we're flying, we're going to keep an eye on this large needle temperature gauge and ensure that it does not go past this green zone here. If it starts to go past the green, it means our engine is overheating and we need to cut back on our throttle or RPM and modify what we're doing, or get some more cold air into the aircraft. Here on our throttle and our RPM gauges, we have green zones. As you're learning, keep your needles in the green zones and you will not have to worry about overheating, but you still need to keep an eye on it just in case. If you are flying past the green zones, then you definitely need to keep an eye on your temperatures because you can overheat and then break your engine. On the left and right of our seat are our fuel tank gauges, our left-hand tank, and our right-hand tank. This knob will control where we are pulling fuel from, in this case our left-hand tank. If I flipped it over here, it would be our right-hand tank. If you had drop tanks, you would put it into one of these positions up here. We'll cover that more in a later video. Now that we have all of these gauges out of the way, we can actually talk about our takeoff. On our speed gauge, we're going to hold our stick back until this gauge hits about 70 miles per hour. And then once it hits 70 miles per hour, we will easily release our stick back to the center position. Nice and easy. You don't have to let it snap back, just gently bring it back. Once we're at 70, we're going to no longer have a locked tail wheel and we'll continue throttling up. At that point, we're going to wait until the plane wants to start takeoff and then just slightly pull back on the stick, give right rudder and left stick. The more throttle we give the plane, the more right rudder we need to give it to counter the torque. And in addition to that, on takeoff, our plane is going to want to roll right, so we're going to give it slight left stick. Our trims helped offset that, but you'll need to keep that in mind. All of our throttle movements, once again, are going to be nice and smooth. Just pushing the throttle all the way forward or pulling it all the way back can damage the aircraft. We want to be gentle and ease into it. All right, let's give this a go. One last thing before we take off. Remember this orientation for landing. This is essentially how we're going to want to land. We're going to want to land on all three wheels, pitched up sort of like this, so that way we don't damage our propeller. All right, so stick all the way back, ease my throttle forward. Try and keep her straight down the runway with my rudders. All right, 70, release my stick back to center. She wants to take off. Give some right rudder, left stick, and I'm up. At this point, I have speed still increasing, solid rate of climb. I will bring my gear up with the gear lever, and then I will put my flaps up. At this point, I can worry about trimming out my aircraft. So, aileron, elevators, and then rudder. You can utilize your slip gauge when the ball is in the center, you're flying straight and not crabbed. And you can get it close enough to however you feel comfortable flying. It'll never be perfect, but you can get it pretty close so you don't have to worry about your plane going all over the place when you let go of your stick. At this point, I don't have my hand on my stick and I'm flying relatively straight. Now I can worry about my artificial horizon. So I'm going to bring my climb gauge to 0. So it's at 0. I'll make sure my wings are level. And then when that is the case, I will hover over cage, mouse wheel. And now my artificial horizon is calibrated correctly. If you want to recalibrate it, you'll bring it back to 0 or thereabouts, level off your wings, and then click the knob here, left click, and it will recage your artificial horizon. As you can see in takeoff, I brought my manifold pressure up, so I'm going to bring it back into the green. You'll see when I brought it back, my trim is now out of whack, and I can retrim for the new throttle setting. The more throttle we have, the more our plane is going to be torqued to the right. So as you give it extreme throttle or cut back on the throttle, you'll have to retrim your aircraft, or you can leave the trim and just compensate with your stick. As you're flying around, you might take a glance at your right-hand side, and it gives you a readout of engine limitations, what your manifold pressure should be, and what your RPM should be, and about how long you will have at those rates. So here we can see for max continuous climb, we would want an RPM of 2700 and a manifold pressure of 46 at the absolute most, or else we'll be damaging the lifespan of our engine. Likewise, below this no handhold, we have a checklist for both takeoff and landing. As you're flying around, if you ever see your temperature start to get wildly out of control, and you can't bring it down just by reducing your manifold pressure or RPM, we can utilize these switches to the left-hand side of our pilot. You can flip down the covers, and these are the coolant control and the oil coolant control. If we flip these switches to the forward position, they are no longer automatic, and we are dumping all of our coolant into the system so it can do its maximum cooling, and we can see that temperature drastically reducing. One thing to note is you don't want your engine to get too cold. You can see here we have carburetor temperature, oil and fuel temps. So just keep that in mind. Once it's below the danger zone, you can flip these back to the up position for automatic. Alrighty, there's the airfield out there, so let's come in for a landing. At this point, I'm going to reduce my speed. When I hit about 170 miles per hour, I can drop my gear, and when I hit about 160, 165 miles per hour, I can do full flaps. That buzzer you hear when I throttle all the way back is a warning buzzer that's telling me my throttle is in an unsafe position for my aircraft to fly. So you can put it just until that stops. If you want, you can have it there. Just be aware that you're essentially killing your speed and your lift. All right, I am at about 170, so I'm going to drop my gear. I'm going to bring my engine RPM back some. To the lower end of that gauge. And now I'm below 160, so I will give full flaps. I'm going to want to land at about 100 miles per hour or a little less. Just keep an eye on how it feels in your descent rate so you don't stall out. It's not a bad idea to retrim your aircraft when you come in for a takeoff or for a landing. I didn't, so we'll see how this goes. Just remember you want to land like you took off, in an orientation a bit nose up, so you don't break your propeller. Alright, I'm looking good on the runway. It's right ahead of me. Watching my speed. I'm holding it here about 110. and I'll bring it back as I touch down. Keep an eye on your descent gauge right there to make sure you're not going to slime into the ground as well. Alright, so I'm bringing my throttle back, my nose up so I don't hit my propeller, and I'm down. At this point, throttle all the way back, and I'm going to let her coast a little bit and then ease into my brakes. Once again, if you don't have your brakes on an axis, be very careful about how you actuate your brakes. Now that I'm below 70, I'll bring my stick back, and I'll have a locked tail wheel and be able to control left and right with my rudders. I'll go ahead and bring my RPM back up to the M, and that way I'll be able to taxi around. All right, that covers basic taxi, takeoff, and landing. Thanks for watching.